Hi, Janice.
Good morning.
Today we're going to do a retirement one, or I guess savings or retirement. I guess a little bit of both. A lot of people wonder what's the difference between an index fund and a mutual fund. So we're going to go over those differences and why they matter. But before we get started, I just want to start off with the conclusion or the bottom line. The bottom line is you should be putting your money in index funds, not mutual funds. And I'll go over the three key differences between those two things and why you should choose index, basically. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing this because this is not my forte. So I am learning.
Cool. So do you know if you have any money in one or the other without, sharing too many personal details?
So I know that we have, we do, but I don't know. See, isn't that terrible? I think I am like everyone else in the world. I think that I don't know enough about it but yes, we have, and we have pensions too. My husband's a police officer, so we have a different type. Yes.
All right. Well, cool. Let's just go over the key differences between these two types of baskets of investments because they're both baskets. So let's go over what they have in common. So neither is an individual stock. You're not buying one share of McDonald's or one share of Apple. You're buying, like I said, a basket of many, many, many stocks. So they are both diversified, right? So that's where they're similar. And the question is, how are they different? Okay, so both of them will give you diversification. I'm sure you've heard that term before, right?
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely.
So you're not riding on one company, succeed or fail. You're riding several different companies so that the risk of success and failure is kind of spread across many. You have many rolls of the dice.
Right.
Am I beating that to death?
Whatever. No, but it doesn't seem as risky as just finding one thing and sticking with the one thing. You're taking a pool and right.
Okay, so here are the three main differences. I'll go over them real quick. The main differences are the goals of each type, index versus mutual, who's managed or how it's managed, and then, of course, fees, which is actually one of the huge elements. So let's start off by talking about the goals. So index funds, their goal is basically, if I can sum it up very tersely, is to be the market, right?
Okay.
So when I say index, they're usually meant to mimic exactly one of the indexes you hear about in the news. You may have heard of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, or the Nasdaq. And for anyone who's listening who's maybe younger or just kind of doesn't know, kind of has consistently pretended they knew what those mean, but sheepishly didn't know secretly inside.
Like me?
I was like
Guilty.
that for many. We've all been
Me?
like that on many topics, right?
Yeah.
So let me just tell you what those mean. So they're basically they're formulas for the top 500, 100, or however many companies based on certain criteria. I believe the S&P 500 is the top 500 U.S. traded companies based on market cap or size, how much money each company. The top 500 most valuable companies, right? The Dow Jones Industrial Average, I think, is a little bit more subjective. It's the top 100 companies based on, I actually don't know what the exact criteria, but it's not as cut and dry as market cap or company size. And then the NASDAQ is similar, but it has to do with, I think it has to do with primarily technology or emerging companies. But they're also, all three are U.S. companies, and they're all fairly objective. I do think Dow Jones has some subjectivity to it, but somebody can please add to that in the comments.
Help us out with that one. Yes.
So when I say that the index fund is mimicking an index, so if there's the S&P 500 is the one I'm most familiar with. If there's the 500 largest companies in the U.S., then the S&P 500 index fund will hold the 500 largest companies in the U.S. There's really no stock picking per se, and we'll get into that in a moment. Right. On the other hand, mutual funds. So we're talking about objectives. So the objective in an index fund is to mimic one of those benchmark indexes, right? Index. I know it's confusing.
Yeah.
But a mutual fund's goal is to beat one of those indexes, right? So if the S&P 500 did grew by 7% last year, the goal of the stated goal of a mutual fund is to do better than that, right?
Okay.
So I guess some would say, oh, okay, the index fund, you are the market, and the mutual fund is you're trying to beat the market.
Got it.
Okay. It's a little, succinct, but that kind of sums it up. They both invest in U.S. stocks, bonds, and other securities. We're talking mostly about stocks. Management style. So we kind of touched on this before. This is the second big difference between index funds and mutual funds. Index funds are what considered passive management, meaning, and we just talked about it, they're literally just mimicking what the index is. If the index is the 500 largest companies in the U.S., there's no need for even a human being to be involved, right? You can
Right.
almost like import it from a spreadsheet.
Oh, there we go. Now we're talking spreadsheets. I get that. Yeah. No, but it makes sense. You're just pulling in those. They are the top 500 companies. I mean, yeah.
There's no element of decision making
Nope.
involved, right? In contrast, mutual funds have managers. They have stock pickers. They have folks who are, I'm going to say throwing darts, but some would say, making educated decisions,
Educated guesses. Yeah.
right? But they do have people who are actively making decisions to try to beat the market, try to beat the S&P 500 or whatever their stated benchmark is. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the difference in management style between index funds and mutual funds. And lastly, the big last difference, the one that I think you and I and most folks will care about, is the fees. What do these
Yes.
things cost?
That's what I want to know.
And the difference is substantial. Okay, so as you can imagine, index funds, because there's no human beings, no highly paid finance dudes picking the stocks, and it's just literally, I mean, I hate to make it, this is a kind of a silly, simplified example, but you're exporting from a spreadsheet what's in the index.
Right.
The fees for index funds are extremely low, less than 1%, right? Or is that
Okay.
That's actually less than 1/10%, right?
Yeah. Yes, because 0.81%. That's less than 1%. Yep.
And on the flip side, mutual funds will usually have expenses, and these things can have different names, expense ratio, but just call them the fees. I mean, gosh, I wish people were more direct in this world, but anyway, the fees for mutual funds are about 10 times as high. It's about 0.8%.
Wow.
Now, I want to caution you here. I did say 10 times as high, and that should sort of shock you, but I know most people will be looking at this saying, whatever, 0.09 versus 0.8, those are both microscopic. What's the difference?
Over time.
Over time.
Yes.
And we're going to show you the difference, right? So if you put in, let's start off with a very simple example of $1,000 that you socked away, earning 7% over 30 years. So let's say at age 30, you had an extra $1,000 and you just put it in, one in an index fund and another in a mutual fund. Just, an average mutual fund and an average index fund.
Okay.
At the end of those 30 years, your index fund will be $99,000. That's great.
Wonderful.
And your mutual fund will be $86,000, about $13,000 less.
Okay.
Right? So, gosh, I actually wish that we had used bigger numbers to really emphasize the difference. But on $1,000, right? Would you agree that $13,000 is a big difference over the course of your retirement?
Very big. Very. Yes.
I mean, I actually prefer to do these, multiply everything by 10. Let's say you started off with $10,000. You can either have, is that $1 million? Yeah, $1 million.
Oh, with the math.
Right, I know, right?
I'm getting the calculator. Let's go. All right.
Versus $860,000. So that decision of 0.09 versus 0.8 cost you almost $130,000.
That's a lot.
Now it's beginning to feel. You're beginning to feel it, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right. So I know it's tempting because the numbers look so microscopic. It's like a tip. It's like the change at 7-Eleven. It feels like that, and that's kind of what the people who are selling you are counting on, unfortunately. But it's a huge difference. So yeah, just to sum it up on that, you going back to the $1,000 example, over 30 years you will have spent $1,800 in fees for your index funds, and that's a lot of money.
It
Over 30
sounds
years.
reasonable though, over 30 years, right?
Whereas with the mutual fund, over that same 30 years, for that same $1,000, you would have spent $15,000 on
Ouch.
fees. Yeah,
Yeah.
so almost 10 times as much. So that's it. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's obvious that my slant or my point of view is that everyone should have like 100% of their money in index funds, and I just don't see any reason to be in a mutual fund. And I know there's going to be counter arguments, especially from any friends who are listeners or friends who are in the financial services industry. And I say, please bring your arguments. I would love to have that conversation. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't think so, but
I doubt it, but no, but it would be very good to hear somebody that does that, and maybe they have a different perspective.
yeah. So we're going to keep this one real simple and short. This is kind of more of an FAQ: index funds versus mutual funds. This was actually, I learned a few things myself. Janice, I hope you did too.
Oh, I learned a lot with this one. Thank you.
Cool. And I hope the listeners have learned as well. And I invite conversation or pushback. Any mutual fund champions, please bring it. And any bogle heads or index funds dudes, please cheer me on. All right. I'll talk to you all later. Bye. Thank you, Janice, and talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
Bye now.